You are driving home after an exhausting day, your mind preoccupied with a looming deadline, and you inadvertently cut someone off in traffic. You immediately justify it as a momentary lapse, a rare mistake born of overwhelming stress and fatigue. Yet, when another driver does the exact same thing to you the very next morning, your mind instantly labels them as a reckless, selfish menace. This is the universal hypocrisy of human perception. Why does the human mind afford itself endless grace while judging the rest of the world with such ruthless finality? We navigate our own lives intimately aware of the invisible burdens we carry, the pressures that warp our behavior, and the contexts that explain our failures. But when we look outward, that nuanced understanding evaporates, replaced by rigid verdicts about the character of those around us. This phenomenon is not a moral failing, but a deeply ingrained mechanical flaw in how the brain processes reality, known as the fundamental attribution error. It is a specific type of cognitive bias, which is a systematic deviation from rational judgment that distorts our perception of the world. We instinctively overemphasize dispositional or character-based explanations for the behavior of others while severely underestimating the external forces acting upon them. The roots of understanding this perceptual distortion stretch back to the mid-20th century, heavily influenced by the pioneering work of psychologist Fritz Heider. Heider dedicated his career to examining how ordinary people make sense of interpersonal events, proposing that we act as naive psychologists trying to find cause and effect in the social world. He noticed a profound asymmetry in how we assign blame versus how we assign circumstance. Humans are storytelling creatures by nature, and we crave narratives that are simple, predictable, and easy to categorize. A world where people act poorly because they are inherently bad is much easier to navigate than a world where good people are driven to terrible mistakes by complex, unseen pressures. We construct these simplified realities because the alternative requires a level of cognitive exertion that our brains actively try to avoid. From an evolutionary perspective, the brain is an energy-hoarding organ that relies heavily on a heuristic, a mental shortcut used to speed up decision-making and conserve cognitive resources. Judging someone's core character takes a fraction of a second and demands almost zero mental energy. Conversely, analyzing a complex web of environmental triggers, historical traumas, and immediate stressors requires intense, deliberate processing that the brain prefers to bypass entirely. Building upon the foundation laid by Heider, social psychologist Lee Ross formally coined the term in 1977, cementing the error into the lexicon of behavioral science. Ross demonstrated that this distortion is not a rare occurrence, but the default setting of the human operating system. Even when participants in his studies were explicitly told that a person's behavior was forced by external rules, they still attributed that behavior to the person's true character. The ripple effects of this default setting are quietly devastating, slowly eroding the foundations of our most important relationships and fracturing societal trust. Misunderstandings that could be resolved with a simple conversation instead calcify into permanent resentments. We build walls between ourselves and our partners, colleagues, and neighbors, convinced of their malice or incompetence, entirely blind to the invisible storms they might be weathering just out of our sight. Consider the dynamics of a high-pressure workplace when a usually reliable colleague suddenly misses a critical deadline. The immediate, almost reflexive thought is to question their work ethic, their dedication, or their competence. The mind leaps to a character assassination rather than pausing to wonder if they are dealing with a sudden illness, a family crisis, or an overwhelming, poorly communicated shift in organizational expectations that sabotage their efforts. This asymmetry of grace creates a lonely world where everyone feels deeply misunderstood while simultaneously misunderstanding everyone else. We demand empathy for our own complex situational factors, the external pressures, environmental constraints, or unseen stressors shaping an action, yet we deny that same contextual richness to strangers. This double standard guarantees perpetual conflict, trapping us in a cycle of righteous indignation and perpetual disappointment with the human race. The ancients understood the danger of this reflexive judgment long before modern psychology gave it a name. As the Stoic philosopher Epictetus observed, people are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of them. Our anger and frustration rarely stem from the objective reality of another person's actions, but from the uncharitable, heavily biased narrative our minds instantly construct to explain why they took those actions. Overcoming this pervasive distortion requires redefining empathy, stripping away the cultural misconception that it is merely a soft, passive feeling of pity. True empathy is a rigorous cognitive discipline, a deliberate act of intellectual rebellion against the brain's lazy default settings. It is the active, conscious effort to suspend judgment long enough to gather data, refusing to accept the first, easiest explanation that your mind offers up. We are often taught that empathy is an innate trait, something you either possess in abundance or lack entirely. In reality, it is a highly trainable skill that demands we override our hardwired biological shortcuts. It is the mental equivalent of lifting heavy weights, requiring resistance against the gravity of our own assumptions, forcing the mind to stretch beyond the comfortable confines of its own subjective experience. To cultivate this skill, we can apply the mental model of the circle of competence to our understanding of human behavior. This model dictates that we must clearly define the boundaries of what we actually know versus what we only think we know. When evaluating another person's actions, we must humbly admit that our knowledge of their internal state and external pressures is almost always near zero. The first step in dismantling the bias is mastering the art of the intentional pause. Between the moment you observe a frustrating behavior and the moment you solidify your judgment, there exists a microscopic window of opportunity. As psychiatrist Viktor Frankl famously noted, between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space lies our power to choose our response, allowing us to pivot from reflexive anger to deliberate curiosity. You can operationalize this pause through a strategy of situational substitution. When someone acts in a way that seems irrational or offensive, ask yourself a single disruptive question. Under what specific circumstances would I act in exactly the same manner? This simple inquiry forces the brain out of character assassination and redirects its computational power toward imagining the hidden environmental variables that might be driving the behavior. Building this into an automatic habit transforms how you navigate daily friction, but it requires consistent, deliberate practice. Start with low-stakes encounters, like the barista who gets your order wrong, or the pedestrian who bumps into you on a crowded sidewalk. Consciously invent 3 plausible, non-malicious reasons for their behavior, training your neural pathways to seek context before delivering a verdict, gradually making this your new cognitive baseline. Psychologists suggest adopting a 2-step attribution process to systematically correct our natural blind spots. Step 1 acknowledges the brain's automatic function, accepting that an immediate character-based judgment will arise unbidden. Step 2 is the manual override, where you deliberately introduce situational factors into the equation, consciously adjusting your initial assessment to account for the vast, unseen realities that shape every human action on this planet. To effectively execute this manual override, you must become an investigator of the unseen, looking for clues that explain rather than condemn. Is the person operating under severe time constraints, lacking crucial information, or responding to an invisible hierarchy of authority? By shifting your focus from the person's inherent nature to the architecture of their environment, you unlock a much more accurate and inevitably more compassionate understanding of the world. The profound alignment between psychological findings and ancient Stoic wisdom offers a powerful blueprint for self-mastery. Both disciplines teach us that our initial perceptions are deeply flawed, colored by ego and evolutionary shortcuts, and that true clarity requires relentless self-correction. By marrying the empirical evidence of cognitive science with the enduring practices of philosophy, we forge a resilient mindset capable of navigating the complexities of human interaction. The most surprising consequence of dismantling this error is the immense psychological relief it brings to your own life. Carrying the belief that the world is populated by malicious, incompetent people is an exhausting, heavy burden that drains your emotional reserves. When you stop taking the behavior of others personally and start viewing it contextually, you free up massive amounts of cognitive bandwidth that can be redirected toward your own growth. This transformation of perception is fundamentally a transformation of the self, altering the very texture of your daily existence. By extending grace to others, you inadvertently build a more resilient, peaceful internal world, insulated from the chaotic unpredictability of other people's actions. You realize that you cannot control how the world behaves, but but you possess absolute authority over how you interpret, process, and respond to that behavior. The impact of this shift extends far beyond inner peace, radically enhancing your effectiveness in every arena of life. In leadership, it separates the visionary from the tyrant, allowing managers to fix broken systems rather than punishing struggling employees. In parenting and partnership, it fosters environments of deep psychological safety, where mistakes are viewed as problems to be solved together rather than evidence of fundamental personal flaws. Ultimately, recognizing the fundamental attribution error brings us face to face with a profound, unifying truth about the human condition. Everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle, navigating a labyrinth of pressures, fears, and constraints that you can barely begin to comprehend. The bias is the veil that obscures this reality, tricking us into isolation, while the disciplined practice of empathy is the act of lifting that veil. The mastery of the mind begins with the mastery of perception, demanding that we look past the illusion of the surface. You must choose, every single day, to extend the same nuanced understanding to the world that you so desperately crave for yourself. Step out of the comfortable trap of easy judgment, embrace the complex reality of the human experience, and walk through the world with clear eyes and an open heart.